In today's news, nothing to hear, nothing to see. All is well with democracy, and the good guys are in charge. Our lead story of the evening involves an incident in South Boston, where...
Not attempt to adjust your equipment. We are in control. This is Sinister Mysteries. Tonight, we bring you another disturbing case from our files.
Enjoy the rest of the broadcast.
You did
never
such a
fails.
good job putting that together.
It never fails. I'm sitting here scrambling, trying to share stuff, and it's like I can never get it done in time. It's like I'm listening to it, and I'm just like, oh, I'm running out of time. It's
Goodness, we gotta.
No.
I guess we gotta make a longer.
I'm glad. It's like I appreciate the calm of it, but it was a we project, not an I or you. It was definitely a labor of intensity from all of us involved in this thing. So
well, there were on a couple of continents, which was very cool. The puppet and voiceover guy, and Jeremy did the music, and but you put together all those visuals, and it's just I love watching it. Hello, Charles. Hello, Tanya. Hello, Joe.
Yes, hello, everybody.
Lori. Hello, King. Here we are. I keep getting a low bandwidth signal. I just rebooted my router, so hopefully we're not going to have any problems. But I don't know what the hell this is about. But anyhow, Vice President. So I love your subtitle, by the way. You and I were both so busy this week. We didn't communicate that much, but the reality of choice. So hopefully we're going to illuminate some things for some folks, maybe who don't know how this whole thing, Pence, what a humiliation of a vice president. There certainly has been a string of, people who have subsumed their egos or, so we're going to go in chronological order. Shouldn't take too much time.
Yeah, there's one of the things too. It's like if people look at the image, there's a reason why I have a juxtaposition of both Lyndon B. Johnson and Mike Pence on either side.
Oh, nice.
Talk about one that. Is because there's a reason behind that. It's going to be rather subtle. It's going to take some fingers digging, for why that could be why there'd be a similarity between these two choices as a vice president stuff. But there's a reason they're in the positions that they're in.
Nice. I'm not of anywhere of correlation because on one hand you would think absolutely night and day. Pence and Johnson. Although LBJ, he's dead, so he doesn't care. But he's taking a little bit of a beating with the release of all these JFK pages.
Yeah, that's
he was. Oh well, Joe says he's intrigued, so I certainly am too. They're shouting out who to hate.
I'm one of those things. We'll see if Joey picked up on that too. I picked up one of those things too, where there's only been 4 instances of something occurring, and Kamala Harris is one of them.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. It's been really in the whole history of the presidency, right? There hasn't been too much. Like VPs were sort of VPs. Sometimes they're replaced. They don't work out. Let's just start at the top and work our way through and talk about all of it systematically. So, I forget when I found this out, probably when I started really researching the American Revolution and the aftermath, reading some biographies of the early presidents, the fact that from 1789 to 1804, the vice president was simply the runner-up in the election. Craig, I think, I think about some of the, right, like Joe Biden would be Donald Trump's vice president. Like the
Oh
thought
yeah.
is completely nightmarish. So, due to the electoral college vote. So that's how come Adams becomes Washington's VP. Then Jefferson becomes Adams' VP. And there isn't a lot of love lost between these guys. So they kind of learn this early on. So, for instance, you have in 1796, and it's not the same party either, right? So 1796, it's John Adams, who was a Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson, who is a Democratic Republican. Now, those of us who subscribe to Jefferson's theorems call ourselves Jeffersonians, but okay, at the time, a Democratic Republican. And it's hard to get things done when people aren't speaking to each other, which Craig was sort of the rumor and the optics of Biden and Harris. She was sort of put in a garden house with her own staff, and you're here because you check certain boxes, but I don't have to like you. So,
do you want me to tackle the boring, for the boring details of the vice presidency? Like, right, it'll take me a couple minutes.
Yeah, you mean early on? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, because there's been 49 vice presidents in the history of the U.S. There's total of 49. This was first established in 1789, as outlined in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, where the vice president was originally designed for two key roles. And that one was obviously succession of the presidency in the case of, death, resignation, incapacity, as we've seen in, several instances of the incapacity ones. I think the most recent one was when Reagan was shot. George Bush was temporarily sworn in as president of the United States during that time. And then, then the powers went back when he came out. The secondary duty, and this is one, it's actually more surprising that more people don't actually know this part, but the vice president is the president of the Senate.
Yeah.
And they preside over the Senate, and that's the Constitution explicitly assigns this role to the vice president to ensure that everything stays in order and oversees debate. So that's one where, and as of the vice president, a vice president has cast 268 tiebreak votes. So in the history of the United States, they've only cast 268 tiebreak votes. So this isn't, even though we've seen one the one that was fairly recently was Kamala Harris had to do one.
Yeah.
It was she had to cast a tiebreak. So it's, even though it seems mundane, I mean, it's actually historically, each one's kind of in a historical moment because there's only we're going on 250 years. And I think, no, actually, 250. Yeah. God, terrible on the math part there. Now we're coming up on 250. Yeah. Now, so 268. So, I mean, you're one a year if you break that. And then, so this one, as we'll get into, I don't want to jump, too, because, don't want to give all the goodies away. But this third one was added through the 12th Amendment and then refined the Electoral Count Act of 1887. And this is where the vice president became the one that oversaw the certification of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is, and I said, I don't know if you want me to jump into, give that one away, or if you want to just, we'll come back to that later, where this kind of, so there has only been 4 times where the vice president has had to certify the election for their loss.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this isn't to certify their party's loss, or if they were part of a ticket and they had to like Al Gore had to, certify. So Al Gore was one of them. It was Richard Nixon in 1961, Hubert Humphrey in 1969, Al Gore in 2001, and recently Kamala Harris in 2025. Those are the only 4 times a vice president had to actually preside over their loss, because they were the candidate running for president. Other ones have had to, as the vice president, they've had to certify their own tickets lost because they were running for re-election, but the president lost. But this is the only time where they were the candidate and they had to certify their own thing. And there's a huge similarity. We'll get to it as we get there, but between Al Gore and Kamala Harris, there's a real connection between those two as well.
Yeah. Dang, dude,
Besides
you came loaded for bear tonight. So so King says, and we'll see as we go, and stay with us, King. Back in the early 80s, early 90s, things were different. The presidents and VPs much different than the last 20 years. I don't organically see that, but so it'll be interesting when we get there. So 1800 really kind of caused a problem, caused the sea change and all of this kind of stuff. Because Jefferson and Burr tied. Anybody who knows the musical Hamilton, so on and so forth, knows all the contention there. So it was really Jefferson and Madison versus Alexander Hamilton, and Burr kind of would bounce back and forth. In some ways, he and Hamilton, because Hamilton had such a dislike of Jefferson and Madison, were allied. But Alexander Hamilton, being overly ambitious, opposed Jefferson initially, but then went on Jefferson's side because they had 37 votes and they could not break the tie. Nobody was moving because the Federalists initially did not want Jefferson. Remember, John Adams was a Federalist. There was a lot of bad blood there. And that was really what led to ultimately the duel and Alexander Hamilton's death. That really burned Burr when he found out that Alexander Hamilton was kind of the tiebreaker in a sense, but swung people. So after that, we have the 12th Amendment, which stated then that electors cast separate votes for president and vice president, and that they had to be from the same ticket. They had to be on a single ticket. So that checked a lot of boxes. So not bad. I mean, in the first 11 years of the country, with the president, right? Because a lot of people don't know that, okay, Yorktown was October 1781. Things weren't buttoned up, and the Brits didn't go home and the American soldiers didn't go home until 1783. So because it was all being negotiated in Paris, because the French were so, I kind of had a laugh a couple weeks ago where a French parliamentarian said, oh, the ideals of the United States no longer match the Statue of Liberty. Why don't you send it back? And what's her name? The new press secretary. She says to the reporter who brought it up, well, they should remind them that if we didn't help France, they'd all be speaking German now. And I was thinking, if France didn't help us in 1781, we'd be a British colony.
We'd probably still be a Commonwealth.
Yeah. So,
there may actually not be a Canada-US type thing if in that case. I mean, it honestly could have been the same thing, territorial.
Yeah. It's just really interesting. So let's see here.
One of those things too is Jefferson, like I said, he was the one that certified his own victory too after that thing.
Yeah.
As like an added insult in the thing. As far as I know, he is the only one that's ever had to do that. Certify his own, actually certify his own victory.
Yeah. Yeah. So really, really interesting. And then, so what happens then is presidents did not pick their own running mates. So again, there's another stage in the process. The stage in the process now after the 12th Amendment is that early vice presidential candidates were chosen at party caucuses where congressional leaders decided on the nominees. I would argue, Craig, that in some ways that still happens. I think that happened with Sarah Palin. And obviously the RNC and the DNC have very big hands. So my understanding, I know I'm skipping ahead a little, but my understanding is McCain went to a meeting. He wanted Joe Lieberman, the independent, right? If anybody remembers Joe Lieberman, he was an interesting guy, and they sort of blindsided him with Palin. So we'll save that.
Well, we'll kind of but I mean, it does work for where right now, because it's kind of a lead up to it. Those are modern examples of what was actually happening in the beginning, because it was one. It wasn't so much that these guys were, they were just all lined up aristocrats, that it's your turn, it's your turn to take this. No, it was when it was done, basically it was like chess moves. It was like posturing to get here, this is the thing. If I do this is going to put this in place. And that's where a lot of the ones like the picks like Sarah Palin, that was done to try to lock in, because McCain was not popular with the religious right, with a lot of the Midwestern. He wasn't popular. So what they did is they got the mama bear, the slick, talking, female governor from Alaska that had that popularity on that side, and they were like, okay, if we get her, this is going to help lock in that. But the problem was, you could see it from the beginning. Those two were not. They weren't the same. They weren't the same. McCain and Palin were not. It's you can't. It's like that house divided thing. He's like, you can't, and that's one of those things too. Pence was another thing where Pence was done for a reason. It wasn't that he was the best one to go with Trump and that ticket. No, Pence was done because here's a guy that just switched from the Democrat Party, and here's like, we got to make sure we get these ultra conservatives that that like this clean cut looking guy from the Bible guy from he's going to come in here and everybody's going to lock in, and that's where. So yeah, you weren't jumping ahead. You were actually just this is gone from the beginning to now. This isn't something new.
Tanya brings up a really good vote. I believe that Sarah Palin cost McCain, potentially lost him the presidency. I think it was a huge gaffe on the RNC's part.
Well, it very well could have been, because at that time, as people saw, the country was kind of going to that center left. It was kind of lurching this way. And so what you did is you brought in, McCain was there. That's why Romney and McCain that was kind of like that time, because they were that center left. They could appeal to, I wouldn't say like the Reagan Democrats, what it was like, the way this says, this was the more moderate Democrats would be like, well, you know what? I'm not really quite ready to go that far left, so, McCain, war here, I might, but just like she said, now you bring in this ultra, just the one that doesn't have anything really in common with the with the city population. And now, boom, just like you said, it didn't work. Oil and water.
Yeah. And we saw that too. There wound up being a lot of skeletons in the closet, but Tanya and I were really taking a very close look at RFK Jr. for a while. And that.
Yeah.
We spoke about it. Seriously, I liked what he was saying about, how business is done in this country and all this kind of stuff. I had read a book and reviewed a book that he wrote an intro to that made a lot of sense. Forget about the subject matter. It's not worth jeopardizing our podcast to talk about. But his VP pick, being the ex-wife of Sergey, whatever from Google, I was like, oh, she's got deep pockets and that doesn't align. And we weren't the only ones. There were other people we were talking to who were like, yeah, okay, good luck. And his campaign blew up shortly thereafter anyway. But yeah, so these things don't always get picked well. So Craig, going back in time to pick up with the chronological, the next thing I have is Jackson in 28 and 32. You have something before that?
Yeah, oh yeah, Elbridge Gerry.
Go ahead.
Everybody knows. Everybody, like in the chat room, does anybody recognize the name Jerry and what that involves nowadays? Anybody? Bueller, Jerry. He was Elbridge Gerry. He was.
Spell it for him, and then they'll know, dude.
Yeah, it's Gerry. It is now a term called gerrymandering. Yep. And everybody should know what gerrymandering is, because that's a well-done thing for both parties.
There you go, Joe got it.
For anybody that wants to throw a thing like that's what. No. Both sides are very adept at doing this and do this very well. So this is not a one-side thing. Both sides are guilty of this horribly. And he was a governor of Massachusetts, and he was known for redrawing districts to his advantage.
Yeah.
And so he was by doing this, and he was James Madison's VP. And so, well done on those guys.
That's early on.
That's early on.
They were playing the games.
And the one I had after that was Martin Van Buren's vice president, Richard Minter Johnson. Did you
Oh
come
well,
across him at all?
let me
Should I
actually
jump ahead?
he succeeds Jackson, yeah. So keep in mind that I said that early VP candidates are chosen by the party caucuses where congressional leaders decide on nominees. But of course, bloody Andrew Jackson, who's really something as a president, a very, very interesting guy, a very good friend of mine who died a couple years ago, wrote a really good biography on Jackson. But anyway, in 1828, Jackson wins with John C. Calhoun as his vice president. But then
Yep.
when they have to do the day-to-day together, they clash over states' rights. They clash over the nullification crisis, which very topical today, what's going on, South Carolina protesting tariffs. So, folks, I'm just going to say this because I don't want to go too sideways. There's only two ways to fund a government, and that's through taxes or through tariffs. So, Craig, like with so
That could have been
things,
Charles.
so many things with this. I'll put that up on the screen in
Yeah.
a second. Like with so many things with this administration, the idea behind it's not bad. America's been taking a beating in the trade wars. So there's a point there. Now, what does I wonder if that might have been Jerry's meander for the crooked borders?
And it could be because it's one of those, for anybody that, like I've had some people, I talk to them, it's like, dude, you understand how weird it is to have the line go perfectly down this street and curl around this block and just curves to ensure that these Democrat votes aren't in this district or these Republican votes aren't in this district. And that's why it's like, I mean, does it make any sense to have this long, skinny strip of a district go here and then it spans out? It's like, yeah, all you have to do is look at congressional districts. It doesn't make any sense. And until you actually realize it's done intentionally to put votes in certain areas. That's why they do it.
I'm trying to find the answer here. And it's not coming up quickly, but it was the Boston Globe in 1812, and they called it gerrymander. So yeah, there you go. Why does Rhode Island
kind of go the little thing about Jackson, and this kind of sets up the one I was talking, the vice president that's coming up here. Yeah. Jackson's one of his biggest things. A lot of people, aren't aware of this part either. He was the one that took us from divine providence to manifest destiny. He's the one, Trail of Tears. Jackson went from working with the native populations to we are their masters and they are to be subservient to, and we wipe them out. This came from Andrew Jackson. Yeah. So this was his, that was his thing. He got this ball rolling, and then back to Joey.
He was a very complicated president. He stood up to the international bankers. He didn't want the national bank in the United States, and that was part of the reason that some things happened during his watch. So in 1832, right, we've had this very contentious relationship with Jackson and Calhoun. National party conventions start selecting the VP candidates. So Jackson drops Calhoun and he gets Martin Van Buren. Now, Van Buren is loyal to the party. He's a very skilled strategist, and he actually has a lot of power. He's one of the first vice presidents, Craig, who actually has some power. He really helps to shape the identity of the Democratic Party. But an interesting thing, and we're going to see this 70 years later, so I'm not going to give it away. Andrew Jackson knew that he can control Van Buren when Van Buren then became president, because Jackson's already a two-term president. So, so when Martin Van Buren becomes president in 1836, back to you, sir. Wow, this is seamless tonight. It's nice.
Yeah, that's where you end up with Richard Minter Johnson, and he's one that he captured. This comes from time.com. This thing, they had a little article on America's worst vice presidents. So I'm going to, where credit's due on this one. Johnson, and I'm going to read it verbatim. Part from their thing is Johnson captured the nation's attention after he killed the Shawnee chief Tecumseh in the Battle of I want to say it's Thames in 1813. And this is to show you like how everything changed from this. His campaign slogan, he actually ran on this. of Rumpsy Dumpsy, Colonel Johnson killed Tecumseh.
Yeah.
That was his actual campaign slogan.
Yeah.
And the adoration for like this thing, country's adoration did not last. He was later dubbed by the most vulgar man of all vulgar men by the Senate.
Mhm.
And as I said, so you can see where this, even though this part, it kind of started to do a nice little, there was a little bit of a shift in the populace, where people were starting to change to where, okay, we're not really excited about this whole, breaking of treaties and going there. The population was kind of pulling away from him on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting how it's all changing when you start to get into it. So, at this time, in general, because Jackson sort of handpicked Van Buren was a little more active, but in general, presidential nominees did not have a lot of choice. Basically, party leaders, again, DNC, RNC kind of thing, were balancing the ticket for geographic and ideological, and we still get that. We get so much of it for geographical. That's how Walsh got on Harris's ticket, Midwest. And there's another example of that. But Truman and Barkley were like that. That's how Truman wound up with Barkley. Ike and Nixon, right? Ike was a military guy. He was sort of seen as being part of the East Coast establishment, although he wasn't really. And Nixon was from this up and coming growing power state, which was California. He had the right amount of ambition. That is a really interesting partnership, Ike and Nixon. But anyway, my next thing is Theodore Roosevelt, 1904, 1908. You have anything before that?
Yeah.
Oh,
well, before.
Also,
oh no.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to acknowledge this so we can get it off the screen. And move on. Joe, gerrymander salamander. Look like a lizard.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so which is cool. And Charles said there was a woodcut. Let's see. Who else besides Vivek?
I can wait for you to get to Agnew. Yep.
I'm not.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I'm not sure who else besides Vivek is running for governor, but there's a very powerful guy who works very closely with Thiel. I have no doubt that Vivek will be successsul.
It's not really a sinister, but one of the things I really, it's like as I was doing the research, really is William Rufus King.
Who was attached to who?
He was Franklin Pierce.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Well, he was the vice president for him. So one of the things, he was only the vice president for 6 weeks before he died from tuberculosis.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. So he lasted, he was like, and he was one that even after the fashion went away, he refused to let go of the powdered wig. He was one that kept the powdered wig in. And this is another little bonus for the people in chat. Does everybody know why the powdered wig was used as a fashion choice?
Didn't they? Well, I know that they kept their heads pretty much shaved or cut really short because of lice.
Yes, that's why.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's what powder. And so that was the whole thing.
We got to know this stuff.
Yeah, it came through. It's just because a lot of people, it's like, why this thing is because head lice was such a bad thing. They had to keep their heads shaved. Well, you don't look very aristocratic with a shaved head going around trying to thing. Yeah. So that's where they came up with the fake powdered wigs. Just to have So that's it wasn't so much as fashion born out of necessity and function, I guess. Yeah. So he was
all different kinds of wigs, and it mattered how much you powdered it and how many curls it had, and there were whole hierarchies, of course.
Yeah, and then the weird part about that one too is, which is I couldn't find, and maybe some of the guys will know this part, but the reason I bring him up too is the office was vacant then until the election. It was never refilled. It
didn't change for a while.
Which, for me, when everybody talks about constitutional crisis and all this stuff right now, that would actually be the definition of a constitutional crisis. You don't have a successor,
right?
And at that time, the vice president just dies from tuberculosis. So president and the vice president are in close contact with each other. So I mean, there's a chance, obviously we're talking 1850s here, so it's not like everybody knew about germ theory. That wasn't a real prevalent thing at the time, but it's just, so here you have a ticket without a vice president until James Buchanan is elected.
Yeah.
And I think so that was the one that was really crazy for me, is how it went almost 4 years without a vice president.
And it didn't change for another 100 years. It didn't change till 1967. Did they make a provision that the vice president had to be, and Joe Redmile says the order of succession was different than it is now, which would make sense.
Yeah, because like I said, the Constitution specifically lays out the necessity for the vice president. So that's why I said I was surprised that nothing was ever done about that. That's why.
Joe, was it the head of the was it the head of the Congress? I mean, the Senate, who would replace the president prior to 1967? I don't want to. I want to watch my bandwidth, so I don't want to go there.
Because it could have been, because it wasn't until 18. I think I'm trying to remember when that was assigned as the vice president. It was there, but the vice president would be the role as president of the Senate, so they should be in charge of the Senate. That's
oh yeah, that's right. So so prior
Speaker of the House,
prior to 1967, who became president if the
live learning on
died?
Sinister Mysteries. It's awesome.
Real time. We'll find out. If we don't know, we'll find out. Prior to the ratification of the 25th Amendment in 67, the vice president would become president if the president died, resign. Okay. See, Google's AI is no darn good. Although the Constitution didn't state historically it was a vice president. Did I not ask it right? Oh, sorry, that was my fault. Okay. If the vice president died, who was next in line for president? Sorry, guys.
No, it's a good thing he's a good typer, because if I was doing that, we'd still be here for a couple minutes.
It's all I do all day. The order of succession specifies the office passes to the vice president. If the vice president is simultaneously vacant, pass to the Speaker of the House, President pro tempore of the Senate, and then cabinet secretaries.
Yeah.
But again, I just don't think Google Labs is really understanding.
Pro tempore, Speaker of the House.
Prior, prior.
Joe just put it up there. Yeah.
Oh, this was prior to 67?
Yes, this was 53.
Place the Senate. Yeah. Oh, I was right. Senate was, the head of the Senate. I thought so. The Senate's always been the Senate is like our House of Lords.
Yep.
They were actually not elected by the people for a really long time, senators.
That's the only thing where I wish our founders had adopted. A little side note. I wish they had adopted that aspect of when you do like the State of the Union address. A president would have to go before the body like that and present their case, and then you could have the body, but in today's thing, could you imagine, when Barack Obama is president, or Joe Biden or Trump, can you imagine the chaos that would be, nothing would get done. Nothing.
No, we already have these marathon speeches and all this kind of stuff going on now. So Theodore Roosevelt, this is interesting. This goes back to, like I said, like there's an echo later of what Jackson did. So Jackson goes, when I leave office, I still want my policies to go forward. I still want to have a voice. Barack Obama, I still want to, be a part of this in the basement in my sweatpants, as he told Colbert. So Theodore Roosevelt picks William Howard Taft. And he gets a lot of pushback, but he's like, no, my progressive policies are really, really important to me, and Taft is going to see them through. Well, Taft is a weak-ass dude. Like, his wife she's like a Lady Macbeth. So Taft is not up to the job. He totally caves to the interests, and he becomes the opposite of a progressive and really starts to lean in a sector of conservative that Teddy Roosevelt despised and had been fighting against through his entire career, through Congress and all of that. So in 1912, and this is kind of unprecedented, Roosevelt runs against him in the Progressive or Bull Moose Party because he says,
Mhm.
I'm gonna be like a bull moose
Precursor
in
to the
this thing,"
Republicans.
which splits the vote and gives it to your favorite president of all time, my friend,
Oh,
Woodrow
Woodrow
Wilson.
Wilson.
Yeah, so that's
Little
how
side note, I will say it
Wilson
again for
became
the people who've
president.
never listened to me say this thing. The fact that anybody attends a Wilson high school, and if you've noticed, most of the ones that are Wilson high school are inner cities. And this is one of the most racist presidents we've ever had in the history of the United States.
Yeah.
And for anybody that goes like an inner city school that's named after Wilson, or goes to one of these things, goes to something where the wing of a college or something is named after Woodrow Wilson, you are basically, you might as well just go to the KKK center. He was blatantly racist. And people, it's just, everybody points out, it's like, this guy's this. No, this guy literally was. And everybody's just like, oh, no. And I'm like, oh, you shake your head. You're like, dude, it's not I mean, even as acceptable as Wikipedia is, type it in Wikipedia. It's going to tell you right there about all the history of the guy. It's not a secret.
Or better yet, go watch the Sinister Mysteries episode on Woodrow Wilson.
On Woodrow Wilson,
Because
exactly.
he was also a Princeton eugenicist. When he went into office, he got African Americans out of administrative positions in the White House and in the government. Yeah, not a nice guy.
He was just part of that early progressives when their thing was to eliminate the undesirables, and the undesirables were anybody who wasn't white.
Right.
It's not a secret, everybody.
So Roosevelt was pushing something called the New Nationalism, and very similar to what Hillary Clinton did when they pushed Bernie out, the DNC. Woodrow Wilson adopted and repackaged a lot of what Roosevelt was pushing as a progressive Republican for his ticket, and Roosevelt never forgot that. He never forgot that Wilson kind of co-opted his package. So, Craig, I jump forward in time to 1940. Do you have anything before that?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the only one that it was kind of the same thing too. It's I forgot about this one. We actually had a couple of other instances where the office was vacant too, and I didn't actually. I'm surprised I didn't catch on this one, because after Chester A. Arthur was James Garfield's vice president, and then that became vacant after 1881. So for 4 years that was vacant, and then after Grover Cleveland was elected with Thomas Hendricks, that office remained vacant from 85 to 89. So there's another 4 years stint, and then they had William McKinley. That was vacant for 2 years. And so once again, we're getting to the things that even like more recently, the office was vacant from 1901 to 1905.
Yeah.
So as you're going through here, is once again, I was kind of like what I said earlier about, as the constitutional crisis thing, like that gets thrown around here. Why are these positions not being filled? Because this is a critical role.
Mm-hmm.
Even after 87, when the Electoral Count Act is passed, the vice president has a very critical role on this one. So why are these things not being filled?
Right. So he had 3, Charles.
Yes.
Because I was looking that up as I was doing my research, because I was just about to talk about FDR.
Mm-hmm.
In 1940, he sort of understood, and I dispute this because Jackson had a hand in it, Teddy Roosevelt had a hand in it, but FDR is sort of acknowledged as the first nominee to really assert his choice and say, this is who I want. One of them, of course, was Henry Wallace. Henry Wallace was a socialist. Now that, but of so many of the farmers, Oklahoma was a very, very socialist, state at the time, because the farmers felt like they were getting screwed. Socialism looked pretty good to them. And I've mentioned this before on the show. Truman really shouldn't have been president. Truman had very, very, very powerful backers. FDR was sick. He stayed home from the convention. Henry Wallace was supposed to be his guy. Henry Wallace was supposed to be the choice. And FDR screwed him over in the 11th hour. As a matter of fact, Craig, right before, like minutes before they were going to announce that Wallace had enough votes for the nomination, the gavel was smacked to give them a night to meet in the back rooms and push and coerce. So that's it. That's an interesting vice president, or that was a vice president that really, really got screwed over. But he had 3 different ones. Then I jumped to 1960, dude.
Yeah, I was looking, as you were talking there, I was trying to look in here and see one of the ones. It's like, because several of these they've died in office, and then just for some reason they weren't filled, and it's one of those weird part.
It's amazing that the president didn't die and create a. We've never had a president tempore. Yeah.
Well, this one, like that one in 1885, both the speaker and the were vacant as well.
Yeah,
as the Speaker of the House and the Senate President positions were then vacant, leaving no one to replace him. Which, once again, what happens with the president? We're just like, all right, Bob, you're up. I mean, just the shade of It's I mean, now we know. Maybe that's why it became so critical to have the way we do it, where we have the one that's not even present, and we just have that long list of success. The line of succession is because of possibly because of this. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Ron, actually, I'm going to get that into it in a second. I think, Craig, it really speaks to the fact that the vice president is not really a legitimate, they're picked not because their skill sets and all. That's what the president is for. So you don't want a vice president that's smarter. You don't want a vice president that's more competent or more liked by the people. But in the age pre-television, so that's why I think, and the Senate was so powerful that it actually makes sense that you would want the head of the Senate and not a vice president. So if a vice president dies, then they already did their job, right? So follow the logic. If the vice president's job is to get the president elected, once the president is elected, the vice president's done their job. So if they die, you want to get a powerful person in there. So Ron asks, whose wife had been helping to run things? Since he's your favorite president, Craig, I'll let you handle this.
Yeah, I just typed it too. Woodrow Wilson. Yeah, it was the one, and where it's we mentioned this several times, where history repeats itself. I think it's going to come out in the thing. I believe that we're going to find out that Biden was in the same type of situation that Woodrow Wilson was like. That do I know if Jill was the one that was doing the stuff, the same thing? But there's a really good chance that she was probably doing a lot of the day-to-day stuff for him, just as her name's failing me. It's my favorite, it's my least favorite president, but I'm trying to can't remember her name.
That's who I think was in charge.
Well, that's one of the, I mean, he says it right. He said it right there. It's like, if I could, but I think it's one of those, because somebody's got to actually make the, like here, do this, that, I think those ones, because that's what she was doing when Wilson was incapacitated. She was doing the presidential duties like that. And she wasn't letting people see. Yeah, she was doing all the stuff. And I think this is kind of the same thing, because the reason I say that is because there's that infamous one where Jill was kind of presiding over that cabinet meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I think history will come back, and we're probably going to find out that this actually occurred. And this is one of those things. Yeah. Because Wilson, they wouldn't even let anybody go see him. It was just like, every time we want to see the president. Oh no, he's okay. He's okay. It's like here's what he wants done.
Yeah.
And I think like a year and a half. So she would technically be probably considered our first female president.
Yeah. Mammy, right? Mammy?
Oh, I can't remember. I'll type it up. It's killing me right now.
We're stumping ourselves tonight.
Well, hey, we're learning right on. We are.
We're learning right along with the audience. Nothing wrong with that. So in 1960, of course, Kennedy and Johnson, and of course, Kennedy is Catholic. He's Irish. He's New England. So they really, really need a larger, broader appeal. And you have Johnson, who not only brings Texas, but brings the Southern vote and brings it big. And there were huge tensions between those gentlemen.
Edith Wilson.
Edith, right.
Edith.
There were huge tensions between JFK and Johnson, and those are really being illuminated now. Johnson, they could not have done what they did to Kennedy without Johnson's acquiescence. They couldn't have.
And that's one of the aspects of the connection between Pence and Johnson.
Ooh, I can't wait to get to Trump Pence because
this is one where it's just like what you just said. There was a contention between the vice president and the president.
Big time. Yeah.
And that's where one of the things, there was always that thing where Pence was not, he didn't want to go along with like what Trump was playing, so there was behind the scenes, there's butting heads. And that's one of the connections to where because there's two moments in most people's modern history that, have really stuck with a lot of people. Like if you could name, it'd be pretty easy. The Kennedy presidency, everybody can name the reason. Trump first presidency, everybody can name the instance where, it just sticks in everybody's head. You've got the assassination and you've got the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
And so in these ones you could see that's where these two, and that's one of the little ties between these two where they have a lot of similarities. Is here was two people that were brought in for a specific thing. Johnson at the time, he was a really great player, leaning on faith and stuff, even though, it's not me to judge someone's character, but I'm not really sure he was leaning as high on that Bible as he'd like to make it. And Pence was the same one. So these are the two that they really, like I said, that's one of the real similarities between these two.
Yeah. So Charles, I think that's the reason for the amendment in 67. Because now we have a president very publicly killed, the vice president steps in, people are starting to understand. So I think it took a little while to let's see. Right. So we talked about the 25th Amendment. Great. Okay. So the president then nominates a new vice president. So more and more power is given to the president, subject to congressional approval. So a vice president almost becomes like a cabinet member. So the president picks them, Congress has to approve them. All right. So when is the 25th Amendment? When does it come into play? It comes into play twice, and it comes into play pretty quickly and then never again. So, of course, when Nixon resigns, Gerald Ford replaces Spiro Agnew. But I don't have anything really on Spiro except that he resigned after corruption charges. That's all I have, Fred. So I know Joe wanted us to.
He was a fiery kind of defender of the presidency and the Vietnam War. Spiro Agnew. I mean, he was that was his thing. I think I'm trying to. He would basically. This is one of the ones too. Like I said, I'll give credit. I didn't know about this. He used to intentionally hit golf balls at people that were spectators. When they're doing golf, he would intentionally hit the golf ball towards them. As I said, that was one of the things he did. He was one that the biggest thing was his declaration of nothing to hide.
Mm-hmm.
Was Spiro Agnew's thing, where he was fined and sentenced to probation. But it was one of those, it's kind of like, I was looking at, and I think, it's, what's with the Northeast governors and all these problems, gerrymandering.
Nixon had quite a crew. Maybe we'll do a show sometime on, Nixon's crew, his cast of characters, right? So John Dean and BB Rebozo, one of the best names ever. Real interesting dude. Howard Hughes was involved with them.
Yeah, because we're getting up, up to the part 2 now, where it's for me. I think Nixon Spiro is, for me, I think is when you can really. Let's see what you think of this. This was my take as I was doing the research on these vice presidents. I think now is when we're really starting to see Mike get involved in politics, the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower warned about this,
At
and
this
so
point,
now, yeah, because now
Yeah.
we've got the likes of Nixon, Agnew. Now Bush Senior is starting to come onto the picture.
yeah, but before that, you got
Yeah.
Nelson Rockefeller. So you got
Yeah,
a
and so-
Rockefeller that close to the presidency. So Craig, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
And I think that's when you're really started to see them, what, it's the no term that what everybody's calling it now. The deep state's really starting to come to the forefront. It's no longer like behind the scenes. This is one where, it's just kind of like anything. It's like we realize, well, we can do this in here, but if we actually start putting something out there in the forefront, then you have, then it's like we become more of a legitimate thing than just a shadow
Right.
body. And I think that's where you start really seeing on these in this order of those ones, because after that, I mean, because you really had, I mean, it was Mondale. I mean, was he really wasn't really all that, there was vanilla. I mean, there wasn't really much. I mean, we could have a whole segment on vice presidents that just really didn't. They just kind of faded into the bins of history. I mean, Dan Quayle was one.
Yeah, so let's unpack it a little. So Carter Mondale, Zabriskie was really the national security advisor. Zabriskie was really in charge. The way Kissinger ran so much of so many things, when the Repubs were in. But Mondale was liberal. He was an experienced senator. He gave him the Midwest vote. He was from Minnesota, so another Walsh situation. And he was very involved because here's Jimmy Carter, who was really reactionary. It was really the public's reaction to the abuses of the Nixon administration. And Ford, after he pardoned Nixon, he didn't have a snowball's chance, so on and so forth. So that's why Carter became president. Carter was an excellent statesman. That was his place, because he got chewed up. He was doing the bidding of people like Zabriskie. So I think you're absolutely right. And then we get really into the modern. We get really into what you'd call the modern era of Reagan.
Yeah, because I would real quick before we go back, like what you said with the Rockefeller. Do you think it was just because of there was still the robber barons that was still kind of fresh in everybody's mind? Just the ultra wealthy control from the early 20s, 30s. That's why the Rockefellers never really could rise, because you have these powerful families. It's always amazing that they never could achieve that higher office with all of their influence. They could never get to that point. And I don't know if it's just the families didn't want this or why. I mean, I don't know.
I feel like they did it. I mean, right? Lawrence Rockefeller was very, very, very involved with the Clintons. You had David Rockefeller, who was very powerful in West Virginia. You had the Dulleses, who took head of the CIA and took Secretary of State. I think it's much better for these people. Although, but then you have a different brand of family. You have a different brand of, so you have here's what I'm going to say. You have royalty. So you have Joe Kennedy, who raises his sons in a certain way. He puts his sons in positions of power. You have the royal families. You have the Bushes. You have the Clintons, who sort of became a royal family in a way, although, the lineage really isn't there. But then you have the kingmakers. And that's where your Rockefellers, that's where your Kissingers,
the Vanderbilts, you
have your royalty and you have your kingmakers. And I think so, as much as George Washington didn't want to be an emperor, didn't want to be a king in perpetuity, Hamilton was a monarchist. Hamilton absolutely wanted him to be like your supreme exalted emperor, king, guardian of the universe, and serve a lifetime term. And Washington was like, we're not doing that part. But America smacks of royalty in a lot of ways. So we're unpacking a lot of cool stuff here. So, of course, Reagan, this is interesting. This harkens a little to Biden-Harris. If you remember, Bush was also running for president, and he hammered Reagan, right? Voodoo economics, Reaganomics was a joke. It was voodoo. So Reagan didn't want Bush. He actually was considering Gerald Ford for a co-presidency kind of thing. So it's sort of a very odd sort of hearkening back. It's a very, very interesting thing, but it fell apart. They couldn't make it happen.
Saturday Night Live would have loved it.
Yeah. Ford was just too much of a liability. So Bush has chosen to balance the ticket. And of course, he has a ton of foreign policy experience, which Reed, director of the CIA, knows where the bodies are buried, knows his way around for this actor from California who was a staunch anti-communist, which is really how he wrote all of that.
Yeah, and he for me is one of the ones where you actually start seeing. I think it's more of like an actual global, influence on U.S. presidency. And this one to where, because he gives his infamous 1,000 points of light, as once he's president, so
hey, I wrote a play that is one of the 1,000 points of light.
Yeah, and so you can see that he has a connection to this, and that's where it gets into George W. Bush, with the secret clubs, and just as those are shows for another time. But you can see, I think this one through CIA. He has that global connection, and you can start to see that this is just like you said with Kissinger and stuff, that we're coming out of that time with Operation Condor. We're coming into this period now where instead of the shadowy players are becoming forefront, power leaders and stuff. And that's one of the things I think it's like Reagan. Here's the actor out of California. He's got the popularity thing. But we need that person that's going to pull the machine along with this guy, and we're going to see, here in about, I would say less than 20 years, we're going to see another person that comes along that's even more of a player than George H.W. Bush was.
Oh yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. A lot of eyes on him. You think it's going to take 20 years if we're thinking about the same guy?
Yeah, I think right there, because like I said, George Bush was in 81, and so 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, let me see. What was my train of thought, real quick? And my position is, and Ron says my first vote was Reagan. My first vote, in point of fact, was I was definitely a young Republican. So, what do you got to be? How old you got to be to vote? 17 or 21?
You've got to be. I think I want to say it's 18, isn't it?
So long ago.
Isn't it 18?
Yeah, so Reagan was my first vote. I was a young Republican. I was going to a very liberal arts college, but Reagan made sense to me at the time. I've been a fiscal conservative all my life. My contention, Craig, is that Bush didn't love being president. I thought his re-election campaign was really, really lackluster. He almost rolled over. I think he liked being in the.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why the one that's coming up, same thing. He never. You're starting to see the ones where the people from behind the scenes. We're getting a lot of these ones where they don't want the limelight. They're still going to be the ones that want to be in the forefront. Biden. They Al Gore. These guys wanted to be out there, but there's one, Dan Quayle. Yeah. He didn't like being in the limelight. He found out, when he got out there with the whole spelling, fiasco. Yeah, added the E on the potato, and everybody's, wouldn't we love to have that in politics now, people? If all we had to worry about was how somebody spelled the word potato on a chalkboard.
You know what? Yeah, it was really in the VP debate 92 when Lloyd Benson said, "You're no Jack Kennedy, sir." That was it for Quayle. That
was a huge mic drop moment at that time. Now, where most people would be like, "I don't understand that." It's like they don't get the reference.
No.
But yeah, we're coming up to like this one. I don't. For me, like Al Gore, I think politics really changed after Clinton. I think that's when we really saw another deviation of politics, and where I think because as we've been going through here, the evolution of the vice presidency has been going. This one is kind of where we see it taken to a whole nother level. And as we're talking about that, I'll get to this. There's a huge similarity between Al Gore and Mike Pence as well. At the end of the term, what those two had to do.
That's cool. So Clinton chooses Gore for the youth vote. Same reason why Dan Quayle was chosen. Ideological reason. It was interesting. Clinton and Gore were a case where they were very closely aligned, right? Both Southern centrist Democrats. And that's kind of unusual where there's that kind of close alignment. But you're right, because when Bush came in, Bush won, right? George H.W. Bush, he brought in Dick Cheney, he brought in Donald Rumsfeld, and those guys stuck around. I think they ideally wanted Jeb, and they really needed Jeb in Florida when they looked. So they went with this beer swilling frat boy who was just happy to be there. And I've actually become very fond of W since he left the presidency. Keeps a fairly low profile, doesn't want to be bothered. He did his 8 years. He took his shit. He suffered Will Ferrell doing the thing with, when Trump, you remember that when Trump became president and he's like, this is great. Like, people actually think I was a good president.
I think it was a good, yeah. Well, he's harkens back to both Jimmy Carter was the same way. Jimmy Carter, Reagan actually to a great extent, and both Bushes were ones where as soon as they were out of office, they rode away. Carter did his stuff with Habitat. Yeah, he did Habitat for Humanity. He was out there, just giving back. And there was a thing, but Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, they want to be out there. They didn't just ride off into the sunset. They're just like, boom, they're out, they're out there. Before that, you never really used to hear from a president. It wasn't until like some ceremonial thing the president would show, because like the last time was the funeral. That's you don't hear from George W. Bush or these until you have something like this, and then all of a sudden there he is. And maybe his paintings that he does for charity, but that's what a president was supposed to do. It's supposed to serve, and then you go back to your normal life. But no, there's the ones. It's like they turn it into like their next chapter. They start their foundations. They do all these things. They bring all this money in. And it's like even the vice presidents, they would start doing these things, and even the vice presidents that would go away. I mean, because you go through the list, a lot of these people were bringing up. There's been a lot of people that wouldn't even know who these people were. The names, because it's vice president. Yeah. But you say Al Gore, you say Dick Cheney, you say these ones. It's because this modern era of the 24 CNN, the 24-hour news cycle, all this stuff's coming in, and so that's how people know so much about the vice presidency now, is because it's always in your face.
Yeah. Well, Gore went on with the inconvenient truth. I mean, he was always environmental. That was kind of his thing, even as vice president. But he was the first one to make $1 billion in the green energy movement.
Yeah.
That kept him out there, which got him away from tippers putting warnings on rock music. That was his wife's thing, if you remember. I remember that. So Bush Cheney, of course, is a very, very different creature, because it's really dad's cabal running things. So Cheney's vice president, you got Rumsfeld, you got Ashcroft, you got the big corporations involved. This is really the MIC dudes. Halliburton.
Oh yeah.
Oh, what? Dick Cheney's in charge of Halliburton. Suddenly we go on, we go to war. How interesting. Cheney is. It's pretty much universally agreed that Cheney was the most powerful vice president that there has ever been.
Yeah, I would probably easily go for that, because it's one of those things. He was the architect of everything from like Patriot Act, all the stuff that came down, and Patriot Act was one of Rahm Emanuel's, thing, never let a good crisis go. Like I said, when they do these things, that I want to. If I got that tribute, I'm pretty sure it was him. It might have been one of the other guys in that state, but that was the thing.
No, you're right.
He never let a crisis go to waste.
No.
The Patriot Act was probably one of the most single-handedly, seizing of freedoms through the Constitution that we'd had probably since FDR.
Yep.
When the internment camps, it's for the Japanese, Italian, U.S. citizens, and this one, because, I remember going to college, 95. We met one of our friends. We kind of pretended to be Hare Krishnas and met him at the airport. Just like shaved head. Just doing this stupid stuff as kids. And now people look at you like you did what? I'm like, no, you used to be able to go meet your family at the gate as they came off the plane.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
or
it's like
walk people to the gate and see them off.
Yeah, you hug your loved one as they hop right before they get on the plane, and everybody looks at it now as like this foreign concept. I'm like, that's how much freedom was stripped in 2001 after 9/11, and that's what I said. He's like, you can't do that stuff anymore, and it's like I said.
Yeah. Do you know, Craig? We've mentioned this on the show before, but I don't know if people know that USA Patriot Act is actually an acronym. And it stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. That's what USA Patriot is. It's an acronym, and quite a
always
mouthful.
Acronyms. Yeah,
quite a mouthful. So McCain-Palin talked about that a little, but I don't know if you remember this. So McCain wants Joe Lieberman. He doesn't get his way. The Republican conservatives are deeply entrenched because the Mick is entrenched, and they don't want. We don't want no Joe Lieberman. But how about the Sarah Palin folks? Do you remember that the RNC shelled out $150,000 to give Sarah Palin a makeover, new clothes, new hair, new makeup? $150,000. I don't think Kamala got that.
Yeah, not from the Republicans, absolutely not.
No, I mean,
it's a joke.
Yeah. No, well, they might have. They might have at the end of the day. By the end, they might have.
Give. No, it's they.
Yeah.
The thing too is, it's you could see it's just they were the packaging. It wasn't so much like what the policies were. This just became, the vice presidency is becoming more of a political, offices and to doing these things. This one probably, I don't know. I would definitely say in the last three, Joe Biden, Mike Pence, and Kamala Harris. I think you really saw that not only were they supposed to be used like in different roles, but you could also see that they became. I think it was a lot less. Like there's a lot less like actual influence being used by the vice presidency, and it was becoming more of like a ceremonial roles. Like, go out here and just do that public appearance. Just go away. Don't bother me. I don't want to see you. Go over here.
Right, but let's not gloss over Biden, right? So Obama comes from nowhere. We did a whole episode on Biden, right? This dude comes up from nowhere, gives the keynote speech at the DNC. Suddenly, oh geez, he's going to be president. He's a one-term senator, right? Raises many red flags. So Biden is a foreign policy expert. He's been a senator from forever. Appeals to white working class voters. Boy, did that change. But he's got all these connections with Burisma and power in Ukraine and all that. What? And Delaware, banking capital of the United States. All the major bank powerhouses are there. And what happens while Biden is vice president? The financial and banking crisis, which was really just a consolidation of power. That's exactly what there was. Lehman Brothers was chosen, and a few others were chosen, and a lot of people got really hurt from that. And that was the time. Here's Joe Biden, Delaware, banking capital of the United States, and suddenly credit cards go from 9, 10, 11% to 17, 18, 20% almost overnight.
Yeah,
that was during that time.
Yeah, it's basically just a fleecing, of the system into
It's usury. It's a very ancient word, usury. And I was happy to see Bernie talk about usury in the banking system the other night with his tirade.
And as we're getting kind of into the modern time here too, one of the things, like I teased just a little bit ago, Al Gore, where Al Gore and Mike Pence really, a lot of their similarities is they both presided over an entirely highly contentious certification process.
Yeah.
One, whether you like it or not, everybody needs to look to Florida on how they count their votes, because we just had a special election on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
We know who won by the end of the night. This is, like I said, there was no thing, and that all came about because of the chads. Everybody remembers it's a hanging Chad, pregnant Chad, slightly dimpled Chad. I mean, and everybody realized it's just that there has to be a different process, and Florida kind of spearheaded the change and made it to where they get the count done. I mean, there's not, it's rare if there's ever a delay in the results. And so Al Gore, he gets in this part, he's ruled through Supreme Court. He's ruled, it rules, the count has to be certified. Boom, he goes through. The party members of the Democrat Party are demanding that he does not certify this, that he does, and this is where the connection is, because everybody points to, Mike Pence, like what happened during January 6th, that this was an unprecedented thing. No, the same people that were that would call for Mike Pence to not certify thing were doing that back in 2001 with Al Gore. But it was the Democrat side that were demanding that Al Gore not certify this, do these things. And he's still, and even to his own, he made, basically vice presidential. He was stoic, and he said, no, this is what has to be done. Even though I don't like it, this is what must be done. And Mike Pence did the same exact thing.
Good point.
Even through the pressure, he had to do what people in his own party were telling him, don't do this, you can't do this. He's like, I have a constitutional job to do, and that is certify the duly elected president of the United States. Al Gore had to certify George W. Bush. Mike Pence had to certify Joseph Biden as the president. They both had to do this role, whether the party liked it or not. They were both required to, as constitutional law, to do this process, and they both did. They both did what they were supposed to do, and they both paid a political price for it. Al Gore, from that moment on, he's he faded off into just where he was just doing books. Well, he faded off, but his political thing ended. Mike Pence, same thing. He's not. His political thing, and that went from, and that's. Yeah, it's, without the politics side, that was more of a demographic thing, Charles, than due to a vote thing. It's like the counting of the votes doesn't lean to a party thing at all. It's just, it got to the point where the process has to go into the thing, because it's just, you can't have like what we just had this last time with Arizona again. Arizona's got to figure this out. You can't drag this thing out for almost a week and a half and not know who's, there's no reason. I mean, you have, what I think Arizona's a quarter of the population of Florida, and they can't get the votes done. Florida can get all these, but that's where I said this should be the standard of every state. Is these are the votes. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like I said with the Florida thing, they're not throwing votes out because they know it's like they're counting one. Everything's counted. Here's the total. Boom. There's your winner. That's what it should be. And as I said, it doesn't. The demographics, that's here and there for the same. The process should be this way, and that's one of the things that was born out of the Al Gore George W. Bush election. Is through that thing, is this process in that state was fixed because of this problem. They saw the problem, they fixed it. Arizona, they got to do the same thing. They got to figure that out.
Arizona is still the wild, wild west. They're behind everything. So Biden, Harris, Trump, Vance is an interesting overlap, because you have vice presidents who absolutely hammered the presidents in the past, said absolutely vicious things about the people that they wound up becoming vice presidents for. But of course, Harris checked a lot of boxes, and we know that. We don't have to lay on it. And Vance is Teal's boy. So I would say, Craig, that Vance is arguably, and we've seen it in the way he treated Zelensky. The tour that he's done of Europe. He's very forward facing. He's different than Cheney. Cheney was part of the guys who ran people. Vance is being run by Teal and his cabal for some reasons that we're going to talk about at the end of the month. But okay, so you got to tell us the parallels between LBJ and Mike Pence.
Well, it was one of those, basically the same thing. Like the parallels is they were both controversial, incredibly loyal. I mean, that's the thing. It's like even though they had their complete disagreements behind the scene, both of them almost to their to their detriment, they were the loyalty where they refused to publicly go out there, but behind the scenes, they were the only thing that main deviation, especially with the documents come out, is, as far as I know, Pence was never involved in a conspiracy to potentially take out the president of the United States. Whereas, Lyndon B. Johnson, it looking like he literally was having the handshake, passing off the money envelope to the Secret Service agent, saying, "Hey, good job, buddy." That was they both, one of the huge things too is they both had political egos.
Oh yeah.
And they both threw those out. They both basically, you took alpha male, like an alpha male personality, and they became almost like a beta to their counterpart, just for the sheer fact of it was kind of, and this is one of the things where it was furthering like a political ambition to a way too. But I think it's one of those at the time, history looked at Pence's, Pence's thing came to an end just because, obviously, things just fell apart. And then, Lyndon B. Johnson, it was like, it worked because he kind of made it work. So he said, allegedly.
Well,
I mean, there's a little less allegedly. There's not as many quotations now.
He escalated Vietnam.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, there was the civil rights movement. It was the war on poverty. Started the first National Bridge Commission to inspect America's highways and bridges after the Silver Bridge collapsed in Point Pleasant. That was under his watch. Complicated guy.
And they both in their way. Like I said, they both. And this is one just as we were talking, I guess in a way both too, you could say that they both had a way of affecting the Constitution in their way. Johnson was involved in the 25th Amendment, and Pence's action stuff kind of led to a resurgence in ensuring that the vice president did the job that they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like there's that. I mean, I know I said the biggest similarity was one of the first ones I dropped. That was one where just, I think from there, they pretty much, they're both, a lot of people are governors, so that's not really a huge thing. LBJ, he did, he wasn't he wasn't a huge proponent of the NASA, was he? LBJ?
Well, a lot of stuff got done under his watch because I'm writing about it in the Mothman novel. Yeah. So,
but I like him personally.
Once the Russians launched and got ahead of us and were putting stuff in space and making us look bad,
you kind of had to. But they had to. Yeah, that was.
Yeah,
I was just trying to think if he was.
We were getting our asses kicked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, we pretty much here. I mean, there's a list. I mean, we can do a whole nother show on the mundanes. I mean, there's a lot of, deep dive in each one, but I mean, that'd be like a 3-hour episode and it'd be like reading a textbook on a few of them. The eyes would roll in your back of the head. But yeah, there's a
show about failures.
Yeah. John, like I said, there, everybody gets their little things named after them, because it's one of the things when you're involved in it. Yeah. It's like, you're going to have
once the Russians, Russia beating us to putting, Yuri Gagarin, orbiting and the monkeys and the dogs and Laika and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like what happened with DeepSeek. You know, when your enemy gets one over on you to that level, everybody starts pulling together. Except that thing kind of went away. So anyway, I gotta run, and but this was fun. Thanks, guys, as always, for contributing and doing a little research in real time. It's all part of it. We can't possibly know everything.
Tease for the next one.
Let everybody know I still have no idea what the heck Timber Sycamore is, but I'll know all about it by next week. And then we're going to debunk Amityville. We'll tell you what the narrative was of Amityville with the DeFeo murders, and then what the Lutzes claimed. And then we'll see who got involved with the Lutzes, and then where the fact and the fiction was. It's delicate in a way, and in a way it's just life, man. So if people are lying, they have to be called out on their lies. That's just life. It's what we do. And then April 28th, the Butterfly Revolution. Get ready for this one, guys. It is an architecture for the future that kind of makes you go,
yeah.
So one of the things we might provide some context. Go ahead.
That's one of the things we strive for on the show. It's like we don't really, we don't really care, what the thing is. It's facts are what matters.
It exists. It exists, and time and money is being put into it, and that's what's important. Right on. So,
well, thanks everybody.
Right, I gotta run.
Don't be sinister. Stay mysterious.
Let's hear from the puppet man. Okay, bye, everybody.
Do you have a sinister mystery in mind? Let us know by sending us a DM or comment in the chat. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Till next time, stay mysterious.